What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Washington Commanders and receiver Terry McLaurin have agreed to end his hold-in as they've agreed on a 3-year deal worth up to $96 million. And Jaden Daniels now has his top target back at wide receiver. McLaurin will get a $30 million signing bonus as a result of the deal. Elsewhere in the NFL, Bengals DL Trey Hendrickson got a $14 million raise after his hold-in. He'll be back with the Bengals. And Texans running back Joe Mixon will miss the first 4 games with an ankle injury. Keep an eye out, you fantasy owners out there. And Mariners catcher Kyle Raleigh has set the record for the most home runs by a catcher, passing Salvador Perez with his 48th and 49th home runs of the season. Here's how number 49 sounded.
And now here's Cal Raleigh, fresh from setting the Major League record. Tight and swinging a drive deep to left field. More history. Goodbye, baseball, off the out-of-town scoreboard. Cal Raleigh with his historic 49th home run of the year.
Cal Raleigh doing some big things up in Seattle for the Mariners. Coming up on the big show, we'll have longtime Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers here in about 20 minutes. Then a little bit later, we'll be catching up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray at 5:20. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Monday. Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing today and the next 3 days as Chad Doing is enjoying his 50th birthday down in California. And hope Chad's having a great week so far. I'm thrilled to be sitting in with you guys talking some ball this week. Obviously, a lot to talk about. We had college football week 0 over the weekend. We are into college football this week. Oregon State kicking off their seasons. I know I'm excited to see what Oregon State can do this year. I'm going to be down at Reser Stadium for the matchup with Cal Saturday night, 7:30. It's going to be awesome to be back and doing some football again. And again, pleased to be on with you guys on this sunny, hazy afternoon. The weather's definitely been hot the last couple days. A little less hot today, but that haze has certainly managed to stick around. But hope everyone had a great weekend and stayed cool out there the best that they could. I know for one, me, and I don't know if anybody else out there is in this same boat, I was just thrilled that my AC unit survived the heat wave. Like many, like others that are out there, a new AC unit is quite a financial investment. And I like to say that at home we got our old girl that, continues to kind of be the little engine that could. And, can't push it too hard, but every kind of big heat wave when it gets, 95 plus, we're always like, let's see what it can do here and make sure it hangs on. And it did. And, I applaud those and shout out my buddy Keenan. I applaud those who managed to make it this last few days without air conditioning. You can definitely tell I am a millennial Gen Z when I couldn't imagine what it was like to not have air conditioning. I think it's pretty, it's like, it's like not having a washing machine or not having a dishwasher, right? I think it's just a bare bones need. And for all those who didn't have air conditioners, I hope you guys stayed cool this weekend, found some water, did something else, just to get out of the heat. But myself, I got a chance to head out to the river yesterday. I'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. But otherwise, a pretty calm weekend for me. Was kind of just chilling, getting ready for the start of the weekend. Worked the Hops game on Saturday night and was riverbound on Sunday morning. So it was a pretty good weekend for Brendan. And as I mentioned, a big thanks to Chad Doing for letting me sit in this week as he's down in California. Happy early birthday, Chad, from B Slot. Ride some rides for me down at Disney. Thinking Space Mountain and Pirates. Those are Brendan's go-tos at Disneyland. Space Mountain, legendary. Pirates of the Caribbean, up there too. I'd throw in Indiana Jones when it's actually not broken down. I swear, every other time I go to Disneyland, Indiana Jones is broken down. But that, Pirates of the Caribbean. He told me he's also going to be hitting up California Adventure a little bit later in the week. Got to hit the Incredicoaster. So many awesome things to do down there at Disneyland. So I must say, first and foremost, definitely a little jealous. It's been a minute since I got a chance to ride on a bunch of those rides. But hope you have a good birthday, Chad, and I'll hold down the fort for you here and get everybody ready for opening weekend of football here in the Pacific Northwest, folks. Obviously, as I mentioned, Oregon State going to be taking on Cal at Research Stadium on Saturday. Oregon, meanwhile, will square off with Montana State at Autzen Stadium. And, you know, after a pretty long offseason, an offseason with a lot of change, I'm just excited to see. Like, we got a taste this last weekend. I watched a little bit of college football, and I'm not going to lie, I was most into the Stanford-Hawaii game. I know that the marquee game that day was Kansas State and Iowa State from Ireland, but call me crazy. Brendan, obviously someone who followed Oregon State, I was selfishly interested in Stanford-Hawaii because former Oregon State quarterback Ben Gulbranson is the starter at Stanford. And we saw the Stanford Cardinal, which are, again, just a very different team. You go head coach Frank Reich. I mean, it's straight out of the NFL. Last time we saw Frank Reich, it was not doing so well with the Carolina Panthers. And then now in the world of GMs and football programs having GMs, Andrew Luck is Stanford's GM. So I'm sitting here watching the game, and you're seeing Ben Gulbranson, chumming up with Frank Reich and Andrew Luck, and just kind of the coming to some of the big pillars of that Stanford program. And on the other side, I've always really had a soft spot for Hawaii, man. I mean, they're one of those programs that I fell in love with back in the mid-2000s when I was a kid, when they started having the success with June Jones and the run and shoot, back in, the early 2000s. But for me, I really started paying attention to them in 06, 07 when they had Colt Brennan. Again, may he rest in peace now. Colt Brennan was one of the most exciting quarterbacks that I've ever seen in college. The way that Hawaii back in the day was always playing at 9, 10 o'clock at night. You had to stay up so late on the West Coast to be able to watch their games. And, I think of that year Hawaii, went undefeated. And, they didn't win the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, but had a heck of a year in 07. And since then, I've always kind of been like, hey, I'll pull for Hawaii when they're not playing Oregon State. And, they've got some unique challenges being over there on the islands, and have ran through some coaches in recent years. But when, a few years back when they hired their former quarterback, Timmy Chang, to be their next head coach, I really thought that Hawaii was going to be able to have an opportunity to kind of get back into what they were a few years ago. And maybe this is the start of it. I know Stanford is not expected to be a great football team, but just off the cuff watching that game, Hawaii played good. They look like a team that, is maybe in contention to be a little bit better in the Mountain West. It's not the Hawaii of old, but nevertheless, if you're a Mountain West team and you took down an ACC team in Stanford, that's a heck of a marquee win. And the point for Oregon State fans, I really watched that game and was zeroed in on Ben Gulbranson and was like, okay, despite Oregon State having Malik Murphy, there's still the occasional chatter of Beaver fans that, Ben Gulbranson should have started all last year and all those things. And after watching that game again, I think what we said, a year or so plus ago about Ben Gulbranson is accurate. I think he's a fine game manager when you have, a decent defense, a strong running game, what have you. But watching that game, the interceptions, the decision-making were always a bit of a question for me with Ben. And, you saw there was an interception that ultimately led Hawaii to get the victory. So, I think Oregon State's in a better place. And obviously I'll be pulling for Ben and pulling for him to have a good year, as he had some pretty big moments for Oregon State back in the 2022 season. But overall, it's just one of those things where I was fascinated to watch college football. There were only a few games this last weekend. It was a taste. And then now this weekend, we're going to get the full smorgasbord of college football games. I'm excited. It's going to be exciting. Here in the show today, coming up here in about 10 minutes, we're going to catch up with longtime Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers. We'll talk some Beavers as the season is fast approaching with Kerry. He was down at Trent Bray's press conference today. Want to get his thoughts on what Coach Bray had to say, and we'll obviously be catching up with Coach Bray a little bit later in the show. And then also, Kerry covers the Blazers as well. Want to get his thoughts on Tom Dundon, the new ownership group, what his thoughts are on the Blazers kind of going into the year. A lot to dive into with Kerry, and one of my very favorite mentors in the biz. Kerry is one heck of a guy. At 4:20, we're going to be taking a deep dive into what I like to call Brendan's TV review. If you guys have sat in and listened to me over the summer or previously for Chad, if there's ever a TV show or a movie or something that really catches my eye, I love to share it with you guys here. And I'll say this. I love my TV just as much as I love my sports. When I'm not consuming sports, I love to watch TV shows. I love to watch movies. I think we are in, the golden age of things on TV, and you can truly find anything that you want. Now, I just got done watching an awesome sports documentary on Netflix, one that I think everyone who enjoys football should give a watch. Heck, it's almost reality TV, so I think it may even have a bigger audience than that, and it definitely caught my eye. It took me a couple days to finish it, but I thought it was quite good, and we'll dive into that at 4:20, talk some TV. And then at 5:20, a very special guest will be joining us here on the Rip City Drives. We'll be heading down to Corvallis to catch up with Oregon State head football coach Trent Bray. We're very excited to catch up with Trent, get his thoughts on the season and much more as Oregon State prepares to host Cal at Reser Stadium on Saturday evening. As I mentioned earlier, Trent Bray had his Monday press conference previewing the matchup today, getting ready, and obviously a little bit later in the week, we're going to have some more Oregon State interviews on Tuesday and Wednesday, so stay tuned for that. But very excited to catch up with Trent Bray and kind of get his thoughts ahead of Cal. This Oregon State team is completely different than where they were a year ago, and I think Oregon State is primed for a bounce back campaign, and we'll kind of dive into the schedule a little bit later in the program as well. But for the most part, I really think that if Oregon State can start the season off strong, and it's going to be a challenge against a Power 4 team in Cal and Justin Wilcox right out the chute. But if they can manage that, I think this could be a very nice bounce-back season for Oregon State. And again, if anyone here listening is wanting more Oregon State coverage, my other gig covering Oregon State for BeaversEdge.com, you can check us out over at BeaversEdge.com. We got wall-to-wall coverage, anything you want from Oregon State, we've got you there, so make sure to check that out. Get on the message boards with the Oregon State fans, and start to preview this game against Cal. Again, you can find that at BeaversEdge.com. And again, that's pretty much the plan today, folks. Make sure to check us out on Rip City Radio 620 YouTube, and you can give us a call, 503-248-0620. Would love to hear from you guys as summer is starting to wind down. I can't believe we're actually here. Personally, in my head, and a part of me still feels like, where's June? Where's July? Like, just the way my sports calendar brain works, it kind of feels like Oregon State and Omaha and college baseball was like a couple weeks ago. No, that was 2 months ago, Brendan. Like, fall camp flew by so fast. And now here we are, August 25th. We got college football week 1 on Saturday, and games even kicking off earlier in the week than that. And we're here, folks. I hate to say it, but summer is quickly approaching the end, and I, for one, am sad about that. But I'm thrilled for college football starting. Thrilled to be talking with you guys today, giving you guys an awesome 3 hours of radio. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Kerry Eggers, longtime Portland sports writer and columnist. Again, love catching up with Kerry. He's as knowledgeable as anybody is in the business here in the Portland sports area, and I'm very excited to get his thoughts on the Beavers and Blazers. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad doing today and the week. Hope you're all are doing well and staying cool out there. A little cooler today, so hopefully everyone is making sure they are avoiding the the deadly heat we've seen the last couple days. Pleased to welcome back to the program our next guest. He's a longtime Portland sports writer and columnist covering the Beavers, Blazers, and more. Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, good to catch up with you again. How are things, my friend?
Doing good. How about you, Brendan? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I always appreciate getting a chance to talk some ball with you, Kerry. Things are good. Obviously, I'm a little sad that summer has kind of come to an end now. It seems like it went by real fast, but on the same token, football season is here, and I'm amped.
Yeah, we're actually it's fun to see a few games. I don't know if you watched anything Saturday. I watched the Stanford Hawaii game, which was a pretty good game. I don't think the Cardinal fans would think it was a very good game, but it was interesting to watch Ben at quarterback there for the Cardinal, and it was a rough one for them.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I actually led into that with the show today. I said, I know the Iowa State-Kansas State game was the marquee game, but selfishly, I was all about that Hawaii-Stanford game, Kerry, because yeah, I thought for one it was a little odd to see Bengal Branson in a different uniform, and I kind of wanted to see how he was going to play, right? Frank Reich is there; that's an intriguing coach to an extent. Yes. Andrew Luck, the GM, but when I heard that they had announced Ben as a starter, I was like, it could be a rough year for the Cardinal, and after that loss to Hawaii, Kerry, I think I doubled down on that.
I think I saw where the over-under for them was 3.5 wins, and one of those wins was supposed to be against Hawaii. So, I'm pulling for Ben because I think he's a great kid. I'm glad that he got another chance to play college football. Here's a guy that's going to be somebody's doctor for the next 35 years. And, wonderful guy. But you're right. It's going to be a rough go for him this year, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest with you, Kerry, you got to appreciate the Bengal Branson plan. I mean, he almost had, 10 years of college paid for by now? I mean, it's smart. Absolutely genius.
How many degrees is he going to get? You're right on that.
Absolutely genius. But, again, catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, you were down at Trent Bray's press conference today. I'm curious, what was your kind of reactions from today as the Beavers officially get ready for Cal on Saturday?
Well, to say that Trent plays it close to the vest would not be doing it justice. He doesn't give away anything and didn't say a whole lot. He's obviously feels good about his group. I think Saturday's game is going to be a good one. And I know that odds makers say Beavers by 3. That means they think they're just about even because Beavers are playing at home. And I don't think that's too wrong. Cal is – anybody that thinks it's going to be an easy game for the Beavers, I think, has another thing coming. I think Cal's defense is going to be very strong. They've got this kid, the true freshman at quarterback that's going to start. You can pronounce his name. Don't worry about me doing that. Jaron is his first name.
Yep, we'll go with that.
But, from Hawaii, tremendous talent, I understand. So I think it's going to be a very intriguing game to watch.
Yeah, Jaron, I believe it's Sagapolte was at one point, an Oregon State lean. He was at one point an Oregon lean and, eventually ended up at Cal. But, again, a true freshman. I'll be curious about that. The one thing is I wasn't able to get down there today, Kerry, but I was listening to the press conference, getting ready for this radio show. And I think the thing that kind of stood out really to me from Trent, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on, was one, he made a point to be like, I'm not saying anything that could give Cal an advantage. Yeah. And two, there were a couple questions asked about some guys' availability. Trent Bray's not going to answer those.
Yeah, I just think it's paranoia. It's ridiculous. Are you telling me that the people in Cal are not going to find out about injuries? They're going to find out, and even if they do, they're not going. It's not going to make a difference in the game. So there have been other coaches. I remember Chip Kelly. He was one of the first coaches. I'm not. It's a competitive disadvantage if we talk about injuries. I actually think the coaches, in the NFL, they have to.
Right.
There's an injury list. And I think there ought to be in college, too, because the fans want to know what's happening with the team. And they're the ones that are paying the bills for these guys to make good salaries. And and now the NIL players. So
Right.
I don't understand that paranoia.
Yeah, it's a tough, like we've said, Kerry, we've seen a lot of different, a lot of coaches handle it a lot of different ways. But I'm not going to name anybody specifically, but for example, a certain receiver that Oregon State is curious about, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, Kerry, to look at the depth chart and not see him there.
Yeah, Darius Clemens is who you're talking about. It looks like he's not going to play, and I don't know what his injury is. I just know he hasn't been in there, and I think Trent Walker is going to be a huge part of this on Saturday. They're going to have to, and he's going to get some double coverage, and I don't think their receiving group is particularly strong or deep. So getting the ball to Trent's going to be a big deal for the Beavers.
Catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Yeah, Kerry, let's go ahead and dive right into it and start at quarterback. I mean, obviously, the one thing we can say that, no doubt, no question, Oregon State upgraded quarterback in a big way from last year with Malik Murphy. And, if you read the tea leaves, they made sure he had a pretty good offer to be here and all those things. And my question for you is, just how far can he take this squad, and what kind of return on investment do you think Oregon State will be able to get this year?
Well, I know maybe Oregon State fans aren't going to like this, but he reminds me of DJ Ungalele. Am I pronouncing that right? He was a good quarterback, and people maybe at the end kind of thought, well, you know what, he wasn't that great, but he was a darn good quarterback that got a lot of wins. So I think Malik is better than him. I think he's a better thrower. He's not a big runner, but he looks to me like he's a guy that has enough experience, and now he knows the playbook pretty well. Trent talked about that. He said, not understanding not only offense, but the reads based on what the call is. So he's going to be a strength for him. I think the strength for the team, though, is going to be running back. They've got at least three guys that are quality running backs. And if that offensive line, which to me is a question mark, if they can do their job and open some holes, the running game is going to be strong again.
Yeah, no, the running game, you mentioned it, I think that room is deep. I was looking at the depth chart today, Marcus Crosby, who I think comes below, Cornell Hatcher and Jake Reichel, I really like too. So that room is very deep, and I think, like you said, if they can get the offensive line play, they could run the ball particularly well like we've seen. I'm curious because, Kerry, you've been around the program, quite a while, and you remember when Mike Cavanaugh was here the first time. Going into, fall camp, there were obviously a lot of questions about the offensive line, but as I was kind of there checking things out over 3 weeks, it looks like they really made progress. And I go back to, when I just followed the team, when I was a kid, it seemed like all those years for Mike Riley, Mike Cavanaugh could always put together a pretty strong offensive line group.
Mike is a guy who commands respect and with tough love. And I'm sure that those kids have responded to that. You're right about he was one of the great coaches for developing kids. They'd come in as a raw freshman and 3 or 4 years later leave as an NFL player. He had several NFL players from here. And I don't know that there's any that he has on this current group, although Van Wells is their leader for sure, the center, the senior center. He's a solid player, and if he can stay healthy, he'll be a leader and important. All the rest of them to me are question marks, and I know Cav has gotten some young guys that he really likes, but they have to play now. And guys like Morano and Strand and Elu, those guys are going to have to come in and play good football for them right away.
Right, and I think just kind of going along with that, Kerry, too, we've been keeping an eye on several guys on the offensive line, but particularly Tyler Volton, who was, a starter last year, and we know at some point this year he will be back, but, that was a guy who, is easily a guard starter when he's back healthy.
Yeah, you're right, and they can use him. And I don't know. Again, we don't know when he's going to be back, so I didn't mention him because I didn't even think about him.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like reading the tea leaves now, and even more so catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Defensively, Kerry, the Beavers have some new pieces, and we've heard now why Trent Bray decided he wanted to take back over kind of the defensive coordinator. He talked about it in spring, talked about it now in fall. Why do you think, Kerry, he ultimately, after kind of 1 year of last year, decided, hey, I need to be back in charge of this?
I don't think he was pleased with the coaching, and he would not say that, but I think he believes in himself, and he has good reason to. He's a very good defensive coach, and it was best for the program. I think he missed it too, Brendan. I think But I remember when Mike Riley gave up the play calling to Danny Langsdorff for a year or so, or maybe a year and a half, and then took it back. And it wasn't that Danny was a horrible play caller. Mike was very good at it. He enjoyed it. It kept him in the game. And I think that's the way Trent looks at it on the defensive side. He wants to keep in the game too.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been one of those things where you look back and the proof has been in the pudding, Kerry, ever since, Jonathan Smith gave Tim Tibesar the pink sheet and, put Trent Bray in that position. Oregon State's defense has been, a pretty solid unit. And, I think back to last year, beyond, just the struggles that they had, Kerry, I don't know if I've ever seen a defense that was as injured as they were last year.
Yeah, they had a lot of injuries, and they couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback, and that's going to be a big responsibility this year, and it's a major emphasis for the defensive coaches. We're going to get some pressure on the other quarterback. I thought Nico Taylor was their very best defender last year, and he's back. I was thrilled to see him come back. I was worried that he'd take an offer somewhere else. Sure. He's a key. Kai Wallen, Thomas Collins, those guys in there, and then I thought Dexter Foster was a real key guy. Was he a freshman last year or a sophomore? He's a
freshman, yeah.
So he's another guy that will need to put some pressure on the quarterback. I think if you're pinpointing them as a key for the entire team, that defensive front, I think you're right.
And defensively, too, I'd be remiss, like Kerry was mentioned, I think Dexter Foster, obviously the pride of Portland, Oregon here, I think he's primed for a big year. And I will say this, Kerry, just last week, kind of the bummer news, the kid had a heck of a journey. I sure was disappointed to see that Micaiah Tongue was walking away from football.
Yeah. Yep, I loved his dad, too, because he was a great guy and a great player, and I was hoping that Michaela could come in there. But, he even Trent mentioned he's had so many injuries, including to the knee, and probably just, and I think he was going to play quite a bit, too, so it is too bad. It hurts their depth a little bit, but.
Yeah, no, he was just to that point, and I really wanted to get your thoughts on having communicated with his dad back in the day and whatnot, because Micaiah was one of the nicest kids, and you just rooted for him, right? It was one of those great stories, and to kind of see that he had another injury, just a week or so ago that put him down was disappointing to see. Again, just a couple more questions here for Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, appreciate your time. What would you say now, just kind of not looking super, super optimistically, what are your biggest question marks for this team as we kind of approach the season?
Depth, and even though Trent said that depth is better almost everywhere, which it probably is, I think they do have some good depth at some spots. But like, for instance, what we just talked about, the defensive front, I don't think is deep. They can't get any injuries there. I think the secondary is very deep. It's a good secondary with Ayers and Skylar Thomas and Patterson and Ivy. They've got some good kids back there, but they can't afford anything in the front. And then the other part of it's the offensive line. So I guess I would say the front on both sides. I really like their skill players on offense, especially if they can get the ball to Trent Walker. Trent should get 80 catches this year. And if he doesn't, it's not working. And so we'll see. I think they'll score plenty of points. I just don't know if they can keep other teams off the board.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for me, Kerry, to see who emerges as that kind of number 2 go-to pass catcher behind Trent Walker, because we know Trent Walker can do what Trent Walker does. I mean, that was, in my opinion, pretty poor quarterback play last year, and he nearly got 1,000 yards. But, you look at, obviously, most likely not having Darius Clemens in the mix. I was kind of expecting a big season from him. I think a lot of people were. Yeah. Now you're elevating Taz Reddix, who I think has had some moments. Coaching staff has talked about it, but again, kind of unproven in a game sense. And same with, Eddie Freoff and David Wells, the rest of those receiver core. I think there's talent there, but until they consistently prove it on game days, it's kind of hard to project,
Eddie Freoff got a lot of publicity. I haven't seen him play, so it'll be interesting to see him. Physical talent, obviously, and played at a small school. So if he can step right in there as a freshman, as a true freshman, and catch 25, 30 passes and be a factor, that would be huge. You're absolutely right about that.
Continuing on here with Kerry Eggers on the Rip City Drive, the Beavers and Bears obviously played last year, Kerry, and it was a blowout for Cal. But now, just with the way the portal goes, I mean, they're two completely different teams as we enter this year. How do you think the Beavers prepare for that, knowing that, Cal has a quarterback they don't have any tape on and all those other things?
Well, Trent was asked today if there's any, motivation from last year's, thumping by Cal, and he said absolutely not. It's a totally different game, and that's true. I'm sure they're going to mention it though in their pregame talks and stuff. But you're right. I don't know. I think as far basically what they do, as he said, we game plan for their schemes, not the quarterback. Now, this kid is a good scrambler, so they'll have to be aware that he can get away in the pocket, and don't let him get away, and don't let him run for 20 yards a couple times. But I think they'll play it pretty straight up defensively, Brendan. They will try to get to him, though. As a freshman, you're going to try to put as much pressure as you can on him. And then offensively, it'll be balanced. And I think they'll have more trouble throwing than they will running, just because it's a first game for Malik. And again, I'm curious to see how well his receivers do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. One of the more intriguing coaching hires as far as coordinators go, Kerry, this offseason was Justin Wilcox hiring Brian Harsin, in my opinion. I mean, it might take some time for that to work out, but I think Harsin's football acumen is well better than, the kind of raw deal he got at Auburn. Cal's offense has got a different quarterback as Mendoza's gone, different running back as Jaden Ott's gone. What do you think? Curious kind of your thoughts on Cal's offense.
Well, again, the quarterback is unproven, so let's see what he does. I agree with you on Harsin. He did a great job, I thought, with his offenses at Boise. They were always well balanced. They've got about 5 running backs that they said might get some time. I'm not sure who won that job. They're all underclassmen. I'm looking at the list right now. I think there's 4 freshmen and then 2 sophomores. So we'll see. We'll see how well they run the ball. They had that kid named Grizel, I think, who had a good game against Oregon State last year. A big kid, 6'4", 205, had 5 catches for 95 against the Beavers. So he'll be a target. They got a little guy, a speedster, De Jesus, who played for UNLV last year. So they'll have some skill players too that'll be good to. I think their strength though is going to be the defensive side.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I think back to, it's crazy to think how long Justin Wilcox has been there now, but right away, like year one, Justin Wilcox has always had that team playing competitive defensive football, regardless of how their offense looks in a given year. But just a couple more things here for you, Kerry. Oregon State's over-under this year. Vegas has got them set at 6.5 wins. Even optimistically, if they stay healthy, I could see them in that 7-8 win range. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. Anybody that says 10-2 is a little too optimistic. They're not going to beat the Ducks. They're not going to beat Texas Tech, and they'd have to be perfect against everyone else. I think 7 to 8 wins is probably what I would. Now, the Cal game is huge on that. If they win that, then yes, it's very. Now, if they lose it, it's going to be harder for them to get to, say, the 8-win because they've got some other tough games. I think Houston's going to be tough. They're not probably going to beat the Cougars both games. They'll probably split on that one.
Right.
So 7-8, I agree with you. I think that's about what I would pick.
So let's switch gears a little bit here, Kerry, with our last couple minutes and talk some Blazers, as I know you're connected there. Lots of news recently, but I'm just kind of your curious thoughts on Tom Dundon's group that plans to purchase the team from the Allen estate.
Well, the thing about him is he's a guy that's going to be very, very involved, and in most ways that's good. In other ways, don't be too nitpicky. Don't get too involved with it. Let your people do their work. I've heard that he's maybe a little bit too involved. Although, look at the job he's done with the Hurricanes. I mean, they came in as a team who was perennially not a playoff team, and they've made it, 7 years in a row. So good for him. I don't know much about his group. I know he can get as many as 20 people in the ownership group. He doesn't have a tremendous amount of money for a guy that's would be the, I guess, controlling owner of a NBA franchise. But I guess they've got enough because I don't think the Blazers would, get this far if they didn't think the guy had enough money to buy him. So it's going to be a long process. This is what we're talking about now, but in another month it'll all be about the team and a new chance to, finally try to go for some wins after, having tanked 3.5 years of.
Yeah, no, and I kind of want to get your thoughts that too, Kerry, because I was actually catching up with one of my good buddies yesterday. We were talking about the Blazers a little bit, and just it seems like in my journeys over the last couple months, like when you combine Young Hansen, when you combine Dame back, when you combine, I think the fact that a lot of fans were wanting an ownership change. It seems like there's a lot of, and maybe it's not going to lead to anything, but it's just from the fan base. It seems like there's a little bit more just energy. I don't even want to say optimism, but maybe that fans that didn't really maybe care too much during the tanking years, maybe they're back a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more excitement about the team than probably in the last 3 or 4 years. Optimism, yes, I think you could say that too. I mean, they've got some good young players. I don't know that they've got championship team players, but they've got, I mean, Avila is a player that I really like, and of course everybody likes some of the young guys that they've had. I think there's no reason to not feel that way. Again, Chauncey's going to get a chance now to show that he can coach and win, and I think that'll be fun to see if he can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And Kerry, you're definitely going to be number 20, right? You're going to start raising some capital, and Kerry Eggers will be like number 20. And
yeah, I plan to have a minority interest in that. I think they said I only need $20 million, so I should be able to come up
maybe
with
we could
that.
just gather all of us journalists together. We'll pool all of our many, many resources, right? Oh, gosh. No,
it's hard for me to envision.
All jokes aside, Kerry, I really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you down at Reeser on Saturday night for our nightcap. And, yeah, appreciate the time, and I'll see you on Saturday for the Oregon State game.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Kerry Eggers, ladies and gentlemen, a longtime Portland sports writer and columnist. You can read his work at kerryeggers.com. Kerry is one of my favorite people to talk to in the business, and as I've said before, always been a go-to mentor for me in the biz as well. So appreciate you, Kerry. You are the man. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll put a bow tie here on hour number 1 and get you ready for hour number 2. Again, coming up a little bit later in the show, we're going to be catching up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Monday so far. Just a few minutes left here in the final segment before we get you ready for hour number two. Just caught up with Kerry Eggers, longtime Portland sports writer and columnist. You can catch his work at kerryeggers.com. We were also talking about Oregon State wide receiver Darius Clemens and his status that was not shed any more light on from head coach Trent Bray today. However, since the most recent conversation with Kerry, we have reported over at beaversedge.com, as Darius Clemens has posted on his Instagram, that he will miss the entire 2025 season as he has begun the rehab process for a ruptured Achilles tendon. Absolutely a brutal injury for Darius, and wishing him the absolute best during his recovery, and hope that he's back to 100%. But again, as we were talking about that, it was something we weren't really allowed to speculate on until Darius made the post himself. But now that Darius has, we can kind of talk about it a little bit. And for those Oregon State fans that are curious, again, would highly recommend checking out the conversation at beaversedge.com. But that's a big blow for Oregon State. We'll need to obviously see who steps up for the Beavers in the interim. But we'll continue that conversation a little bit later here in the program. I want to take the last couple minutes here and just have this be a Cal Raleigh appreciation couple minutes. What the Mariners catcher has done up in Seattle this year and everywhere with his bat has been nothing but impressive. And I want to go ahead and play that clip one more time of Cal Raleigh's historic 49th home run a couple nights ago.
Tight and swing and drive deep to left field. More history. Goodbye baseball off the out-of-town scoreboard. Cal Raleigh with his historic 49th home run of the year. Cal has hit more home runs than any catcher in the history of the game of baseball. And he does it right away on August the 24th on a Sunday afternoon here at T-Mobile. Home run number 49 on the year for Cal Raleigh. He continues to expand the storybook season. The incredible year for Cal. It's a two-run home run. Holy smokes.
That was Mariners catcher Cal Raleigh with an incredible game a couple nights ago. And again, you really just got to be impressed with what the Mariners have been able to do, mostly led by their depth. I really think they've got a chance to make a real charge at the postseason this year. Again, taking a look at the standings currently out in the American League. They're still 2 games behind the Astros, but again, when you look at the wild card standings, they are just half a game out of the Yankees right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that ultimately settles in. The Mariners have been a little slower in their last 10, just 3 for 7. But what Cal's been able to do, nothing but impressive. I have a feeling, folks, maybe we'll see what kind of season it comes to be. But I have a pretty good feeling that there could be some Mariner fans out there, maybe be naming their future son Cal. Just a guess, just a theory, but that's what I'm thinking with how good he's been here for the Mariners as of recent. We're going to take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting into the second hour of the program, getting you ready for Trent Bray in the third hour. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. The Washington Commanders and wide receiver Terry McLaurin have agreed to end his hold-in. They've agreed on a 3-year deal worth up to $96 million. Jaden Daniels now has his top target at wide receiver. Terry McLaurin will get $30 million signing bonus in the deal. And everywhere, fantasy managers of Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels rejoice. Elsewhere in the NFL, Bengals DL Trey Hendrickson, who has been holding in for the same reason, gets a $14 million raise to return to the Bengals. And Joe Mixon will miss the first 4 games of the season with an ankle injury. Over in the MLB, Mariners catcher Cal Raleigh has set the record for the most home runs by a catcher, passing Salvador Perez with his 48th and 49th home runs. Here's how it sounded last night.
And now here's Cal Raleigh, fresh from setting the major league record. Tying it, swinging a drive, deep to left field. More history. Goodbye, baseball, off the out-of-town scoreboard. Cal Raleigh with his historic 49th home run of the year.
Cal Raleigh doing some big things in Seattle. Last hour, we had Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers on the program. A little bit later in the show at 5:20, we're going to catch up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in here on the Rip City Drive. Hope everyone is having a great Monday and staying cool out there today. Again, it's a little less hot today than it was the last couple of days, but when it's this hot, you're either looking for air conditioning or water. And I'll tell you, folks, I had a blast finding my favorite watering hole yesterday. And no, I wasn't talking about a bar. I was talking about legitimately a watering hole. I wasn't the only one with this idea, as it seemed like the entire state wanted to join me and my buddy Keenan in the Clackamas River yesterday. But man, it's truly one of my favorite, if not the favorite leisure activity I had. And I had a blast yesterday. It was, yesterday was weird. After the first 2 days of this heat wave on Friday and Saturday just brought really sunny, really hot temperatures. It felt like Saturday night into Sunday, it kind of got a little bit more humid. I think we had a little bit of some haze. There were some air quality issues. Just kind of that hot air that had stuck around for a little too long. But nevertheless, I looked at the weather yesterday, and it was like, oh, it's going to be, partly cloudy, partly sunny, but it's going to be still 96, 97 degrees. And with football season fast approaching and the weather starting to change, I was like, heck, my buddy and I, we got to get back out there, got to enjoy at least one more day on the clack. And man, like we got up at the crack of dawn compared to floating. Usually if you go out there, you can get down to the bottom where you drop the first car, and you can get there, 10 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning, get a parking spot, be totally fine. But many a times, and it's happened to us too, if you don't beat the crowd and you get there a little bit later, or if it's hot and it's a little bit, people are just moving a little bit faster in the morning trying to get out there, you're going to find yourself having to park in a less than ideal situation. So my buddy and I were chit-chatting and texting back and forth on Friday, and we're like, all right, so we usually meet up at 9:30. It's going to be crazy hot. We know it's going to be just wrecked with people. What time should we end up getting out there? So we decided on about 8:30, 8:45, just to, really make sure that we weren't, parked on the side of the street or anything else, and could actually get down there and have a spot. So long story short, we make our way down the 205, getting off over at Oregon City, and start making our way up the Clackamas River. And every time, folks, it just amazes me. And again, I hope some of you out there that are listening are people who have done it before as well. But it amazes me how many people can get out and get moving and get to an activity that early in the morning. So we showed up I think we ended up getting there closer to 8:45 after we got our food and everything else, kind of got everything packed up and ready to go. And heck, we showed up that parking lot, and I don't want to say that there's, let's just say for the sake of argument, there's 100 spots in that parking lot. Maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. And we get there and we're like, okay, 8:45, we felt pretty good, but still there was an outside chance that we could, dare I say, if you can't get in that parking lot, you're going up a hill and then you're kind of having to walk a bit of a ways and sometimes park your car like right on the side of a street, almost in a ditch. So it's just not ideal. So we get there about 8:45 and the lot's about 3/4 full, but still room for us to find plenty of space. And I remember just looking at my buddy, and again, we're both 29, and I looked at him and, it's like 8:30, 8:45, and I'm like, man, kudos to all these parents who were able to get a lot of little kids up out here dressed and everything else. Like, that was the first thing that I was impressed by. I'm like, even like myself, I'm like, it was a little challenging to, get up, pack everything. And, like I mentioned to you guys, I worked the hops game on Saturday night and, got all that done and then was, trying to get all my stuff packed and ready to go because it's not simply just a show up activity. There is some planning required. You got to make sure you got all the necessary accoutrements, both, the tubes, the pumps, some ice cold beverages, so on and so forth. And so we get there and again, the place was just packed. And I'm like, man, like the wherewithal of a lot of these parents to be able to get their kids up and get everybody out there it was impressive. And heck, sure enough, it was 8:45 and, we end up getting everything out of his car, moving to my car. And as we do, we leave a car at the bottom and then head up to the top. And when we left, the stream of cars, it was not even 9 o'clock yet, folks, maybe 9:15. And the stream of cars coming down in the parking lot, like it was full by probably 9:15. And I was like, dang. So all that to say, I think me, my buddy Keenan, and a lot of other people really thought that yesterday might be the last, quote, weekend, nice day to go to the river where there's not football, all those things. And, you consider that August is just about wrapped up and, more kids are going to start school soon and all those things, coming up that suddenly have people's schedule so much busier. And I was definitely glad to be able to get out there and at least spend one more day out on the water. And as I've said to you guys before, it's nothing fancy. It's nothing, Michelin 5 stars. Like, truth be told, it's actually kind of just a little, I would almost say just a little blue collar. Like you get in floats and you're going down there and you're just floating down a river in a tube, man, and got some music and some beverages and all those things. But I always love the interactions I get when I'm floating, the people you bump into because it's not that big of a river and, all those things. It truly is one of my happy places. And my buddy and I made sure that we got our money's worth. And I say money's worth when you pay $9 to long or $9 at the bottom, $9 at the top. So we put in it. We had a record for putting in. I think we had gotten in the earliest we'd gotten in all year. So we were in the water by 10:15, 10:30, and we didn't pull out of the second boat ramp until about 6. And then by the time we went and got dinner and got home, it was like 8. And we're like, man, talk about, maximizing your day, man, like spending straight up 12 hours doing something. And, we stopped, we made that float, just extend because, very much like I've heard my good buddy Chad doing talk about his golf game and how he's got to maximize it in the summer. It's the same thing with me. And I know there's got to be other people listening right now who, have boats, ski boats, and like to, go wakeboarding or water skiing or anything else. And as much as I love this great state of Oregon in the summer, that's kind of the extent of when you can spend time in the water here. And as someone who I think could be part fish for how much I like to be in the water, whether that's, pools, lakes, river, all of it. Like when I went to Hawaii this last year, there was just a day where my buddy and I just were pretty much floating in the ocean almost all day. And I'm like, that's my happy place. And when you when you realize here in Oregon, you kind of get maybe June, July, August, and maybe it's half of June, half of September to get out there and enjoy, the water sports and water activities we can have here. You really have to make those opportunities count. And even so much so that this next week, obviously Oregon State plays at 7:30 on Saturday night. And my buddy and I are like, well, is there a chance we could even be crazy and go Sunday or go Monday since we got Labor Day? So we might even try to still sneak in one more before the year is out. But it always amazes me. And one thing that I've certainly started to learn as I've gotten older is time. It goes by so freaking fast, and you just have no, you can't slow it down. And it's like I feel like just the other day, like I mentioned to you earlier in the show, just the other day it felt like Oregon State was playing in Omaha. Just the other day it felt like we had 4th of July and I was out at the St. Paul Rodeo. Just the other day it felt like Oregon State fall camp day 1 was starting, and now we're August 25th. We're getting close to the start of the football season. I'm excited because we're getting close to the start of Blazers season 2. And as I talked about with Kerry, I think there's a lot of optimism and hope with this Blazer squad. And I'm personally excited because I'm going to be having a new Blazer show, and I can't believe it's taken me actually an hour and 11 minutes to mention it. That the Blazers wrap up 6 to 7 on Thursdays during the season and be hosted by your boy. So your boy got his own radio show now, talking some Blazers. So I'm very excited about that, and big thanks to the Trailblazers, Chad Doing, and everyone involved for thinking this loud voice deserved more airtime. But I'm excited, folks. It's going to be awesome. We're going to, get some cool guests, lots of people who got opinions on the Blazers, and really kind of hope that this is going to be a better season than we've seen the last couple years. But all that to say, as much as I'm excited for the Trailblazer season, which I am, and I'm still holding that at bay a little bit because we still got a little bit more time. But like college football, like y'all know, I've covered Oregon State for over a decade. I've been a fan for Oregon State much longer than that. I went to school there. It's my school. It's my program, my colors, all that. And, for those of you who know, it's also my debt. So I think as long as I'm still paying off Oregon State, I think I really have to be attached to the hip with them. Gotta love college debt. But all that to say, it truly is my favorite time of the year when we get into football, and there's so much optimism around this Beaver squad this year after, a really rough year. But that also means that like summer's over, and I'm one of those people who, I love Oregon to an extent, but the fact that we only get 3-ish months of that really, really nice weather, it wears on me. And if you try to find and ask Brendan how he's doing on a 3 o'clock dark at 3 o'clock December rainy day, the old optimism, man. I'm a firm believer that you see more sunshine, the happier that you are, and all those things. So yeah, no, you got to take advantage of it, get out there, enjoy. We still got what's looking like another pretty good week of weather coming up, not quite as hot. And for me personally, I always love when the first couple Beaver games of the year are great weather. And I looked ahead, like obviously Beavers and Cal play at 7:30, so you're not worried about sun or nothing, but it's going to be like 86, 87 that day. So you're going to have like probably 70, 75 degrees at kickoff. And for a fan, what could be better than that? So definitely excited for that, and big shout out to my buddy Keenan for going floating with me yesterday. Had a great time, bud, and obviously look forward to seeing more people that I can continue to chat with in my journeys down the Clackamas River. Truly is a one-of-a-kind activity here in the great state of Oregon. Coming up on the big program next, we're going to get into Brendan's TV review, a Netflix breakdown. Can you guess what sports documentary it's going to be? We'll tell you about it next here on the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone is doing well and staying cool today. Definitely a little cooler today, but definitely still pretty warm out there. I was doing some errands earlier today and just unloading stuff out of my car. I'm like, man, this is actually kind of warm. So nevertheless, we're staying nice and warm here in the Pacific Northwest. But Brendan Slaughter on hand with you, and here in this segment, we're going to be breaking down one of the better sports docs that I've recently watched on Netflix. Dare I say, and my buddy kind of looked at me crazy when I said this yesterday, but I'm going to double down on it. The best sports doc that I've watched on Netflix since The Last Dance. And I'll even expand that, just best sports doc since The Last Dance. And The Last Dance, the way that they did that, the timing of it, I think made it great because we were all at home. And I can remember even working Rip City mornings at the time, and we were in such a in-between phase with sports as we were approaching COVID that it was like when The Last Dance aired, we'd be breaking it down the next morning for like an hour or whatever, just talk about The Last Dance because it was so impactful. And we were far from the only radio station to do that because it was just like, hey, look at all this and, look at what's on TV when we're all stuck at home. And very much in the same reason why I think that, I don't know if like The Last Dance came a little bit later, but in that same breath, it's the same logic of I don't think that there will ever be a Netflix show that was watched and in a short amount of time as Tiger King was. Because Tiger King happened right when we were all like, hey, everyone's staying at home, we're all locked down, and Netflix like, hey, let's drop this documentary. And then it became, what it was. And I think The Last Dance had that same kind of an impact. And getting into this, I will start with this documentary. For those who have seen it, you probably know where I'm going with this. America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys. Now, I'll start with this. I am not a Cowboy fan, nor did I grow up a Cowboy fan, nor do I have any allegiance to them. But I'm also not one of those fans who despise Cowboy fans either. I've just largely been apathetic towards the Cowboys because they've not been particularly relevant in my lifetime. I was born in April of 96, and we'll be getting to that a little bit later here in this. Not too long ago, I was scrolling through Netflix, and I saw Netflix start to tease this show, and it was like coming out, the following Tuesday, yada, yada. And I was intrigued. I love a good sports doc. I mentioned The Last Dance, one of my all-time favorites. And I'm like, okay, like I could get behind this very much. Like I love a good 30 for 30, particularly football. Like one that's relevant in this conversation. One of my favorite all-time 30 for 30s is the Four Falls of Buffalo. We'll find out here in just a minute how much that is relevant in this Cowboys discussion. But nevertheless, I was just intrigued to watch it once it started. Now, to understand why I was really wanting to watch this, I think you have to go back to the mystique that I grew up hearing about but never really understood for myself. When I was born in April of 96, the Dallas Cowboys were the world champions of football. Heck, they had won 3 out of the last 4, and one could argue Dallas Mania at the time I came into this world probably rivaled Jordan and the Bulls as far as the sports dominance of the 90s. Just knowing that the NFL is kind of king, I think it's safe to say that the NFL and the Cowboys were probably bigger than Jordan in the 90s. But, 3 titles versus 6, that's a great conversation nevertheless. Yet, since I came to football consciousness, again, as I mentioned, I grew up a big-time college football fan. The Beavers were my team, so on and so forth. But growing up, largely because of my dad and grandpa, we didn't really have an NFL team per se. Like I grew up and it was, hey, we pull for the Beavers that end up on, various teams. So like when I was a kid growing up understanding NFL football, I gravitated towards the Cincinnati Bengals and the St. Louis Rams. Why? Because the Cincinnati Bengals had Chad Ochocinco / Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada, 2 of the better receivers in Oregon State football history. And then also the St. Louis Rams, because they had Steven Jackson, and Steven Jackson was a dog out there, and still the Rams' all-time leading rusher, a record that will never be broken, by the way, thanks to how NFL treats running backs now. But and not like to an extent, like that was my football. So like I didn't grow up a big-time Seahawk fan, I didn't grow up a Niners fan. That just wasn't really, the college football was where it started with our family. But again, since I came to football consciousness, I've always grown up hearing about the Cowboys, just like many of you probably have too. America's team, yada, yada. And to be honest with you, it's kind of annoying. And I think I've even said that on this program before, where it's like, I don't get it. I don't get the hype. I don't get why, because they haven't won anything of consequence in nearly 30 years. Like the entire time that I can remember football, and you can start listing off all these Cowboy coaches and everything else that I've seen, the Jason Garrett, the Wade Phillips, the Bill Parcells, so on and so forth, where they hadn't won anything. But nevertheless, outside of knowing that the Cowboys were 3-time champs with Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, and along with Jimmy Johnson and Barry Switzer, that was about the extent of my Cowboy knowledge. I think you'd have to kind of live in under a football rock to not know Troy Aikman. I remember that touchdown that commercial a couple years ago that's still in my head. The Aikman touchdown, unbelievable. So it's like Troy Aikman's been in the conscious for some time. Emmitt Smith, obviously, for being the NFL's all-time leading rusher. I definitely was familiar with that. Not so much with Michael Irvin, I'll be honest with. Definitely was more familiar with him as an analyst, growing up, not so much the player, which, again, I got to see some pretty cool highlights along the way and just how dominant he was. And, again, I knew all about Jimmy Johnson, mostly because I'm a big fan of, again, going back to sports docs, the U Part 1, the U Part 2, some of my favorite sports docs that obviously covers the rise of Miami football, to Howard Schnellenberger, to Jimmy Johnson, to my guy, Dennis Erickson, and so on and so forth. And obviously Dennis Erickson replaced Jimmy Johnson at Miami when Jimmy got the job for the Cowboys. And, that was kind of something that I always knew, because a few years later, Dennis Erickson would leave Miami, go to Seattle, have things not turn out there, and then ultimately make his way back to Corvallis. So it's funny, or make his way to Corvallis, I should say. So it's always interesting to see how things kind of work, the whole, if one thing happens, it influences another and all those things. But nevertheless, the show features interviews with the man himself, Jerry Jones, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, Charles Haley, Deion Primetime Sanders, Jimmy Johnson, Barry Switzer, and then a few moguls that I was very surprised were in the documentary, that I was like, wow, kind of cool. President George W. Bush, obviously Texas guy. He had a lot to say on the documentary as well, and it sounds like he has a relationship with Jerry Jones, which I thought was kind of neat. Again, of our ex-presidents, George W. hasn't kind of been a little bit more quiet in his post-presidency. It was kind of cool just to kind of see him and hear from him. Something, again, a blast from the past, I swear. Phil Knight was also in the documentary, and I know Phil Knight is kind of one of those guys who's not necessarily as publicly seen now as he's gotten a little bit older, but it was really cool to see Phil Knight and talk about his relationship with Jerry and the Cowboys and what they did. And then Rupert Murdoch from Fox. And again, polarizing figure to an extent, but again, you just learn about how Jerry and the Cowboys were able to elevate the NFL, and Rupert Murdoch and Fox was such a big part of that. And again, just so many things that you don't know unless you were conscious, alive, a big football fan, everything else. And, I think, beyond just myself, the kids that are in their 20s or even teenagers, I'm sure will be very interested to watch this, because they're like, I don't want to say they're a relic, because a relic would mean like it's something that's so old you can't, but it's like, it's very weird, like what the Cowboys are. Like nowadays, you could ask any kid on the street, or any kid anywhere, like they're going to know who the Dallas Cowboys are because of the star, because they are the most valuable sports franchise, because of what the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, Jerry's World, on and on and on and on. But again, when you step back and you're like, I don't, it's interesting, because the Cowboys haven't made an NFC championship game since that year they won their last Super Bowl. And that, like, when you're considering that, like, basically since I came into consciousness, came into this world, Dallas has been playing catch up from 1995. And, it definitely was interesting. But again, just a few more things kind of diving into the show. I was a bit surprised it was 8 episodes. And I know I was telling my buddy Keenan about it yesterday, and he's definitely not a Cowboy fan. And I was telling him, well, when we were going floating, I was like, man, I'm going to talk about it on the radio tomorrow. But I finished America's Team, the Cowboy doc, and I think it was really good. I was like, I think it's, easily one of the better things I've seen since The Last Dance. And he kind of gave me a look like, Brendan, you're on one, man. He's like, I'm not a Cowboy fan. It's, it was kind of interesting to have that kind of little dynamic between the two of us. But I'm like, nah, dude, I'm like, trust me, in the name of our friendship, like, just watch that first episode and tell me that you're not intrigued to move on. And I think the thing that, instantly caught me with this documentary was right in the beginning of the documentary. Like you started off and you're like, you're wondering, you're like, okay, how's this going to go? And we've even talked about it on this show too, where I go back to a couple years ago, Swamp Kings, the documentary that came on Netflix about Florida Gators, Tim Tebow, Urban Meyer, and all that. I look back on that, and I think rightfully so, it's a Florida Gators and Urban Meyer puff piece. It makes them look great, and it's like, okay, how can we make these guys look even better than they are, kind of a thing. And I know a lot of people would probably look at this and go, okay, this is 8 episodes of Cowboys Mania. They're trying to, give Jerry even more views, clicks, all this stuff. And while I get that to an extent, I don't feel like I ever felt that way. They cover such controversial topics in the documentary that it's not a puff piece. And I don't want to spoil them all, but just kind of there are enough things that kept me intrigued. And just as somebody who is young and building my career too, and all those things that kind of go along with getting into the business, you open with Jerry Jones in a helicopter, and they go land at an oil well. And for those of you who don't know, before he bought the Cowboys, Jerry Jones tried a lot of different things at business. He talked about how he borrowed a bunch of money and tried to open up a chain of pizza shops. That didn't work. He, tried to get into the oil business. He even tried to, at one point, look at owning the San Diego Chargers. That didn't quite work out. And the thing that stuck with me, and again, it's much bigger numbers than you and I at home and you guys listening can possibly equate to. But this was, let's see, I just want to make sure I had the date right here. Okay. Let's see. So Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys in 1989. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say this was about 87, 88. So Jerry Jones was really candid, and this is all in like the first 5 minutes of the documentary. You see him get out of a helicopter. He's got a hard hand on. He goes up to this oil well. And I don't know if it's like the oil well that, he found and got successful with and all that, or if it was just kind of staged. But he talks about how prior to buying the Cowboys, he'd had his luck. He'd tried many different things. And I appreciate this. He's like, I was really good at borrowing money. And again, you go back to the 80s, right? I think, cash or credit was the new cash back in the 80s. We know money moved quite a bit in the 80s and all those things. But he talked about how because of that, and he was trying to find what was going to, be his deliverance, so to speak. And something really stood out with me because everybody has had times where they've, found themselves in a tough financial spot and necessarily can't, find their way out of it or what have you. And again, different numbers, so it's hard. But I think when you parcel it down, it was impressive. And he talks about how he was $50 million in debt. And again, this is, sometime in the late 80s, folks. So add inflation to that and tell me how much debt that is. I'm not going to go there because that's a lot of money. But $50 million in debt, and it kind of, beg, borrowed, and steal to be able to have a chance at one more oil drill, right? One more well, so to speak. And the craziest part was he talked about how, he had, members, I think he said it was something like his wife was, calling his father-in-law, wanted to check in on him because, again, he was in debt. They were maybe worried he was going to hurt himself or any number of things. And again, you're $50 million in debt back then. It's crazy, right? And at that point, I'm like, wow, okay, like, not $50 million, but I think everybody in life has had an opportunity or had a chance or a moment in their life, I should say, where, maybe times were a little tight, right? You were up against it and you needed something to pay off and you kind of bet big and so to speak. And Jerry talked about how he was $50 million in the hole. He had one more oil well that he wanted to try and was able to get the rights to or whatever it was. And that oil well absolutely exploded. And I forget what the exact number was, but it was enough for him to pay off his debts. And he just talks about the process of how, he was there, they drilled, and he's like, I can still remember the scream of the oil, coming up through the, the cracks and all those things all these years later because, whether this is true or not, and this is a little on the nose, but he's like, he knew right then. He's like, I'm going to use this money to buy the Dallas Cowboys. And say what you will, but, looking back, I know Jerry's always kind of been a polarizing owner, but it's like, you got to give him credit for also just like going to seeing something that he wanted and then going and just simply taking it. Like, you go back in the 80s. Apparently, Dallas was a little apprehensive about him buying it, considering he was an Arkansas guy and, wasn't a Texas guy. And there was rumors he'd move the Cowboys to Arkansas. Come on, folks. Like, who actually believed that? Could you imagine the Cowboys in Arkansas? Come on, man. No, Cowboys are in Big D. But it's just, I found that so hilarious. And, the part about just the money, it's like it truly underscored that, like, Jerry was up against it. And then all of a sudden, just one thing changes your luck. And I think it's, luck, optimism, glass half full thinking, whatever you call it. But that's how it started. And from that moment when I'm like, wow, I thought he just, made a bunch of money in oil and it was never a struggle when he bought the Cowboys. No, as it turned out, there was kind of a struggle. And, he was literally up against it in every way. And then he used that money to buy the Cowboys. And that's where things got interesting. Upon becoming owner for the first time, I got to see the entire reaction when he gave Tom Landry and Tex Schramm the boot. Again, for me, this is how could you not know what it was like when he fired Tom Landry and Tex Schramm, or not know if you're a sports fan? Of course I knew, but I didn't know any more than just reading the Wikipedia about it at the time, like, all those things, because it was so long ago, right? And then, to fire a legendary coach like Tom Landry, even though he was slipping, that's not easy, right? I mean, you think about, like, I don't know exactly what the comparison would be now, but it's like, that was a move that took some cojones, so to speak. And Tex Schramm, I think Tex Schramm probably could have had a job under Jerry Jones, but Jerry Jones comes in and is like, hey, Mr. Tex, I'm going to have your job now. Me, Jerry Jones. And as it turns out, folks, and we'll get to this a little bit later, Jerry still has that job and still is the guy who wants to be able to be the GM and all those things. So upon becoming owner, I got to see that, and then he went to go hire Jimmy Johnson, and they called it the Saturday Night Massacre, and I think the shoe more than fits, right? He goes and hires a Jimmy Johnson, who was a national championship winning coach, but a coach from college, right? That was a risk after you fired a multiple-time Super Bowl winning coach in Tom Landry, right? So he comes in and just says, all right, clear the table. We're doing this my way. And from what I heard and what I've watched, like, Dallas wasn't necessarily receptive to that at first. They loved Tom Landry. He was their guy. They talked about Tom Landry's, like, going away parade. How many coaches get a parade when they get let go? And you're just like, okay, that underscores just how big of a figurehead Tom Landry was in Texas and with the Cowboys. We're going to continue on with this notion here in the next segment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll continue on with my breakdown of America's team, the Gambler and his Cowboys, coming up here next on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. For those who are watching on YouTube and saw the big grin that was on my face as we came back at a break, you know, I feel like for one of the first times, I got to give a shout out to my producer, Michael Shacker, for playing Hand Clap. I believe it's Fits in the Tantrums. Could be missing on the artist, but I definitely know it's Hand Clap. And uh, it's one of those moments where I know a lot of people out there have to have a song that takes them back to a specific place. And hearing that song takes me back to college and Oregon State and Clodfelters or wherever we were. I feel like that song was so popular given a minute ago. So yeah, it just felt like for a minute I was back down in the great city of Corvallis, Michael Shacker. So thank you, I appreciate you. Finishing up our Cowboys discussion here on the Rip City Drive, getting you guys ready for the final hour. Again, we'll finish up my thoughts on the Cowboys Netflix documentary here. And then 5 o'clock, we'll get you ready. An Oregon State football reset. We're going to take a look at some key things for Oregon State this year, get you ready for our 5:20 conversation with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. I'm definitely excited for it. I got a chance to obviously catch up with Trent a lot this fall camp, and feel like I got a pretty good pulse on how the team is going to look this year. I think the Beavers are primed for, at the very least, a bounce-back campaign, whatever you want to call it, whatever that looks like. I think a bowl game is all but a certainty this year, barring any kind of major problems. And I'm very excited to catch up with Trent, get his thoughts on Cal, get his thoughts on the offseason work, and kind of all those things as we're getting closer to Saturday night's kickoff. But to finish off my thoughts on the Cowboys, because I got a whole lot more notes, folks, and it's if I haven't convinced you to watch it yet, maybe I will here. So I just finished up that, Jerry had obviously come in, fired Tex Schramm, fired longtime Super Bowl winning coach Tom Landry, brought in Jimmy Johnson, and, now we're kind of seeing how they begin to build this team. And I think one thing that I wasn't really familiar with, just again, the time and knowing, was the Herschel Walker trade. And knowing that they got 5 draft picks for Herschel Walker and were able to quickly kind of rebuild their team on the fly, not to mention the year that they came in, they were, not exactly a good football team. Were able to, draft Troy Aikman, and you get some of the pieces that start to go in place, right? And just to kind of add on to that, we kind of saw the Cowboys rebuild. We saw them get their pieces right. So it was like, first it was Michael Irvin, then it was Troy Aikman, then, it was Emmitt Smith after they got rid of Herschel Walker, and Emmitt Smith being the little ace up their sleeve. And it turned out Emmitt Smith was, arguably the greatest running back we've seen in the NFL as far as longevity and those things. And I think one of the things, too, that I was not super familiar with was the 49ers-Cowboy rivalry is truly one of the great ones. Like, of course, I knew the matchups back in the day, but until you see the B-roll, you see how important the games were, or you see that, the 49ers and Cowboys would play a game in San Francisco, and the field was just a disaster. And you're like, really? Only like 30-some years ago, we couldn't even get proper grass or turf? I mean, amazing, right? And you're just seeing how much farther football's come along throughout the years. And, other than Dwight Clark's catch, which I think is one of the most legendary catches in football, I really wasn't too familiar with those legendary matchups. But there were some dandies in the 90s between the 49ers and Cowboys in the NFC championships. And the Cowboys went back to back. And, we've seen the Chiefs do it. We've seen the Patriots do it. It's not, uncommon, but it's not easy, right? And I think the, kind of apathy that sets in after winning Super Bowls and beating the Bills twice is such an interesting part of it, too. Before, I kind of only knew the other half of it from watching the Four Falls of Buffalo. And as I mentioned, now in hindsight, I respect the heck out of Jim Kelly and what he and Marv Levy and that group were able to do up in Buffalo. I really wish they were able to grab one out of those 4, but nevertheless, they were in their final 2 against the Cowboys. Cowboys absolutely took them to the woodshed the first time, a little bit closer the second time, but again, still largely, Cowboys victories. They go back to back. And then something happened, largely a result of ego that you could never imagine. Jerry and Jimmy had a brewing beef, one that I definitely did not know about. Like, I had no idea beyond, just, hey, they decided to move in their separate directions. And after a second straight Super Bowl, Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson get divorced. once Jerry is gone, or once Jimmy's gone, we see Jerry go get Barry Switzer, who was also a really cool interview. It was great to hear from Barry in this documentary, but very different than Jimmy. And you saw this is kind of when things started to change for the Cowboys. It was more Club Barry rather than Jimmy kind of being the hard-nosed guy that he was. And for what it's worth, Barry was still able to get the job done. They take 1 year where they don't make it and then come back and win the Super Bowl the following year. So again, 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And, Jerry proved that he could go win a Super Bowl without Jimmy Johnson. But I think one of the bigger things that I have taken away from this documentary is, what if those two had just been left alone and they didn't have to have this ego trip and everything else? How many more could the Cowboys have won in the 90s? Like, I think it's a fair question. And, you kind of messed up the vibe, so to speak. And then after that Super Bowl, you started to show, like, cracks were beginning to show. I personally had no idea of the rift between Troy Aikman and Barry Switzer and how that ultimately unraveled. Again, for more on that, you can definitely watch the doc, but it was like, whoa, okay. And then also on Troy Aikman, the NFL needed concussion protocol back then. My goodness. Again, watching this documentary and hearing about how many concussions Troy Aikman had or played through, including in the Super Bowl. Like, you go back then and there wasn't necessarily the week break between the NFC Championship and Super Bowl. And you talk about how Troy Aikman's like, yeah, I was definitely, like, he's like, nobody even, offered up that I shouldn't play or any of these things. And I think knowing what we know now, like, a guy gets concussed on a Sunday, he's most likely not playing that next Sunday. So, you kind of hear some of that and you're like, oh, okay. Like, the NFL, thankfully, has come a long way in that time. But, one of the cooler things as well that I realized with Jerry is that he was a rule buster. He legit told the NFL where to go when he signed outside marketing deals with Pepsi and Nike and said, just stop me. It's good for the league. Almost a kind of renegade doing the good work like Al Davis did. But nevertheless, they rally, win their third Super Bowl in 4 years, cementing the legacy, giving Switzer a ring. But that would be the peak as everything began to slide from there. The Michael Irvin episode documenting his court battle was something I had no idea of. And in the doc, that was something really powerful. And like I said, it's not a puff piece when you're talking about the issues Michael Irvin went through and, so on, and them being open and honest about that. I thought that was pretty cool. But finally, we see the modern era, which my entire life has been Dallas being mediocre at best, but still the most valuable sports franchise. Arguably the coolest thing at the end was Jerry and Jimmy making up. Who knows what those two could have done if they just put ego to the side. It was a legendary rise, so it had to be a legendary fall. But man, that's my rundown on the Cowboys doc. Would highly encourage folks to give it a watch. It's like a step back into a 90s time machine. You see in the trench coats, you're seeing the turtlenecks, everything that was worn heavy in the 90s. And maybe, just maybe, added a little bit of Cowboy love for your friend here. Not a Cowboy fan, but maybe a little bit of respect. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Final hour coming up. We got Oregon State Talk and Trent Bray coming up on the big program. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Washington Commanders and receiver Terry McLaurin have agreed to end the hold-in. They've agreed on a 3-year deal worth up to $96 million, big ones. Jaden Daniels now has his top target back at wide receiver. McLaurin will get a $30 million signing bonus in the deal, and fantasy managers everywhere rejoice. Elsewhere in the NFL, Bengals D lineman Trey Hendrickson, also in a hold-in situation, got his $14 million raise to rejoin the Bengals. Texans running back Joe Mixon will miss the first 4 games of the season with an ankle injury. And Mariners catcher Cal Raleigh has set the record for the most home runs by a catcher, passing Salvador Perez with his 48th, 49th home runs. Here's how 49 sounded last night.
And now here's Cal Raleigh, fresh from setting the major league record. Tight and swing and drive deep to left field. More history. Goodbye baseball off the out-of-town scoreboard. Cal Raleigh with his historic 49th home run of the year.
Cal Raleigh with his 49th home run, now a record for catchers. Coming up on the big show, we're going to have longtime Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers. Later in the show, about 20 minutes, we'll catch up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone is having a great Monday so far. Final hour of damage here on the Rip City Drive. A big shout out to Kerry Eggers for joining us in the first hour of the program. Caught up with Kerry on everything Beavers and Blazers ahead of Oregon State start of the season. The Blazers about a month and some change away. Was definitely looking forward to catching up with Kerry. He's one of my favorite in the biz, and thanks to Kerry for that. And here in about 18 minutes or so, we're going to be caught up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. He's going to join us here on the Rip City Drive. Excited to catch up with Trent Bray. We've talked a little bit this fall camp when I've been down in Corvallis covering Oregon State for BeaversEdge.com. And again, anyone who wants to be in the know with Oregon State, you got to head over to BeaversEdge.com. I'm publisher over there. We've got a great staff, great team, awesome message boards for you guys to check it out. We've also got a great promotion going right now where you can join Beavers Edge and get a whole bunch of other cool perks that come with it. So again, head on over to BeaversEdge.com. Check that out. But again, we'll be joined by Trent Bray in about 15 minutes. A couple college football things we just wanted to touch base on here in the next few minutes as we kind of get you ready for Trent Bray. Before we kind of dive into the Beavers specifically, there was a story that came out on ESPN, I believe it was today, and it was College Football 2025. How much does each position cost, right? And I think this is a fascinating, absolutely fascinating question because it's like the thing that none of us really want to talk about out loud and publicly, but it's that absolutely happens. And it's a quarter, like your football players make money now. That's just the reality of what it is. And I think it's fascinating to kind of see what the going rate is by position. So I'll just kind of run through this real quick for you guys, just so you kind of get an estimation. Again, this was written by Max Olson from ESPN. But we start with quarterback. The going rate for a good quarterback, $1 million to $2 million. Now, for example, just recently, I think we've seen some quarterbacks get close to that. I don't want to necessarily go back and put numbers on players, but I'll just say this from everything that I've heard. Malik Murphy for Oregon State is in this range. That's just the reality of it is. And, nowadays we've all known for quite some time, whether that's the NFL and you see, Patrick Mahomes be able to take his team that, maybe isn't as good as other teams because he's that X factor at quarterback. We saw it with Oregon State this last year. They didn't have an X factor at quarterback, and it ultimately hurt them. You have to have a game changer under center. And I think I go back to a few years ago, the Pac-12, it was one of the better years I'd ever seen when you had Bo Nix, Michael Penix, DJU, Cam Rising. I mean, you just had a group of quarterbacks in this conference. I mean, there was even more that I didn't even name that I thought were like dudes, but I go back to like that year, Penix and particularly Nix were impressive with just their innate ability to win. And, I can't speak for Penix so much, but I know that, Bo Nix was definitely taken care of going to Oregon in that regard. So, it's interesting. There's a quote in here from an SEC GM that says, quote, "The great ones are like 3 million. If you don't have one, it's at least 1 million. These dudes are getting paid, is what one SEC GM said of quarterbacks. So again, it's definitely interesting. There's another ACC person quoted the numbers that were being thrown out there. I thought they were fake at first. I was like, for that guy, 1.5 to 2 million, what? And then you found out that's the market. That's what's happening. So real money is being paid at the quarterback position, folks. I think it's easily the top as far as like everyone knows. If you have a dude under center, you can make the rest of the team. He can elevate, so to speak. So I think that's definitely interesting and why you're seeing colleges now with their NIL resources, either a lot or limited, saving a lot of that for quarterbacks. Running back up next. This is interesting. You take a significant dip. Average running back, 300,000 to 700,000. And I think, there's some, ambiguity here as far as like what every school and positions were. They particularly look at Quishon Judkins last year when he went from Ole Miss to Ohio State and definitely, got over $1 million. So there's obviously some variation, so to speak. But it also says that the running back market was kind of odd this last year and a lot of guys didn't move. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see that like quarterbacks totally, running backs not quite as much. You go a little bit further down the line, receivers, big variance, 400,000 to 800,000. And this, again, another quote from an SEC GM, if you want a guy with any production, it started at 700,000 to 800,000. I think that's a true number one receiver, and then you kind of go down there. Number two, it looks 3 to 5, so on and so forth. So a lot of money being dished out at receivers. Tight end, kind of interesting as well, 200,000 to 400,000. This article says some Power 4 programs were willing to go as high as $800K for an all-conference tight end. That's obviously a lot of money, but then you think of like, some of the game changers, like a couple years ago, would you have paid that for Brock Bowers? Probably. I mean, it's, again, more interesting. Going through the line a little bit more, you get up to the trenches. Offensive tackle, you're going to make $500,000 to $1 million in revenue per this based on what it talked about. It highlights Nevada transfer Isaiah World. He's a first-round pick this next year. Supposedly he got a very, very big offer to go with Oregon. And again, you go back, I think back to one of my favorite sports movies of all time, The Blind Side, right? And for those of you who have seen it, you hear in the beginning when Sandra Bullock's narrating the movie, you probably guessed your highest paid player is the quarterback. And you'd be right. But what you probably wouldn't expect, and I'll never forget it since I heard that movie, probably one of your highest paid next players is your left tackle or right tackle, depending on what, mostly more left tackle because you have more right-handed quarterbacks than left-handed, but that protects the quarterback's blind side, right? And I think, you look at it now, that's why you're seeing a lot more money being thrown out for tackles rather than guards or centers. I think a solid tackle is something that's really hard to get. You flip to the other side, an edge rusher, 500,000 to $1 million. This agent that's quoted here says if it's in the right fit and a program that's got some money, they'll pay $1 million for an edge. That's a lot. Apparently, Texas Tech led the way here. Stanford's Davis Bailey became one of the highest paid defenders in college football. And again, Oregon State will be playing Texas Tech a little bit later this year. And it's kind of interesting that, you kind of see that even edge rushers, impacting the quarterback, big time difference. Defensive tackles, similar range, looking 300 to 800,000. They're talking about the big guys kind of have big premiums. It can be just as expensive for defensive tackles and edges. But again, this is quoted here from a Big Ten GM saying, because just like the NFL, there are only so many humans that that size that can move like that walking on planet Earth. And it's probably fair. I don't know how many 6'3", 300+ pound guys can run a 4.5, right? So I guess that is something that's particularly, rare and worth a decent amount of money. You get to linebackers, 200 to 500, cornerbacks, 300 to 8, and safeties, 300 to 700. Again, I don't think this is something that is quite as relevant for, the Oregon States out there as it is maybe more for, again, you look at this story, SEC, ACC GMs were largely quoted and so to speak. But again, I go back to the quarterback, right? And this last year, you kind of looked at Oregon State, and I think after DJU had left, they kind of they missed. They missed at quarterback last year. And I thought, there's no shame, right? You shot your shot and you missed. And then you saw in the offseason, Oregon State's like, hey, we're not gonna be in that position again. And you went out and got a dude in Malik Murphy, and a dude who is a bona fide leader, a dude who was instantly named as a team captain, when that came out, a guy who won the respect of the locker room, and a guy who can make just about all the throws on the field. He commands respect in the huddle. And I think when you look back, and it's something I mentioned with Kerry earlier, there's, a lot of reasons why Oregon State wanted to make sure they had a quarterback under center. But I think when you look at it also, their football is as Oregon State Athletics Director Scott Barnes said, athletics are the front porch of the university. And dare I would say football is, it's the cash cow. As much as I sit here and love, Oregon State baseball, basketball, football is the only sport that has the potential to bring in money for the university, right? When you're talking about the size of the stadium, the endorsements, everything else, the bowl games that goes along with it. And I think when you look at it, and, like I said earlier, I think it's pretty, assumed. And, I've got pretty good sourcing that says that Malik is in that range that I told you guys earlier about. And I think Oregon State's definitely going to be hoping for a return on investment this year as far as better quarterback play, elevating their offense, and all those things. But nevertheless, kind of switching that back now to 2025 Oregon State, the Beavers do kick off Saturday night against Cal at Reser Stadium, as I mentioned earlier. For all the latest and greatest Oregon State content, make sure you're locked into me and my staff at beaversedge.com. We're an On3 affiliate. It's the best Beaver coverage and message board community around. So definitely check us out. But the last thing I want to touch base on here before we bring on Oregon State head coach Trent Bray here in just about 8 minutes or so was per BetMGM, Oregon State's over-under the win total this season is 6.5. And I feel pretty confident hammering that over this season. Again, I'm not saying that I am placing any bets on it. But if I was, I feel pretty confident looking at Oregon State's schedule and being able to at least get them to 7 wins this year. I know Cal is a 50-50 game to kick off. What we saw from Fresno, I think that's looking like maybe a more winnable game than we saw. I agree with Kerry. I think Texas Tech and Oregon will be tough. But then after that, right, a 50-50 game with Houston, a 50-50 game with App State, Wake Forest at home. I'm going to give the Beavers a nod there. Lafayette, not a very good football team. And then you've got Washington State, Sam Houston, at Tulsa, and Washington State again. At home, I like Oregon State against Washington State, especially with the first year of their new head coach after Jake Dickert went to Wake Forest. Sam Houston, again, also due for a bit of a rebuild, retooling year. Same with Tulsa. So there is opportunity in the schedule. And again, not to be too over optimistic, but as I look at it, there's really only 2 games right now where I'm like, not feeling too great about. And that's a tough matchup with a ranked and highly expensive. I wrote about this recently, Beaver's Edge. No one team in America, folks, spent more money on their roster this last year than Texas Tech Red Raiders. So we'll see how all that plays out in Lubbock on September 13th. And then the Ducks, right? I don't know what to expect from the Ducks, but I do know what to expect in my lifetime. And in my lifetime, I've seen Oregon State beat Oregon at Autzen Stadium 1 time. So, it's a tough place to play. And I think, it still could be a tough matchup. But overall, I definitely would hammer that over. I could see Oregon State 7, 8, 9, maybe 9 wins this year. So we'll see how all that shakes out. It gets started against Cal on Saturday. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be joined by Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter here, and we're pleased to welcome on our next guest, the head coach of Oregon State, Trent Bray. Trent, thanks for taking the time. How does it feel to be in game week?
Feels good. Excited about it.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the offseason. After some struggles last season, Trent, you hit the portal hard. You made some coaching adjustments. What were kind of some of the overall goals for you and your staff after last season entering this next one?
Yeah, it was kind of assessing, from a schematic standpoint, we could have done better to help give ourselves a better chance to be successful, and then, fill in some holes that we had. And I thought our staff did a good job of identifying those two things and getting it done.
How much more comfortable, Trent, do you feel as a head coach in year two? And kind of going along with that, you obviously brought on a couple guys, Rob Akey, Danny Langsdorf, to name a few. Just how much more comfortable do you feel now, and what have those guys brought to kind of the overarching kind of CEO role of the head coach spot?
Yeah, for as far as the comfort part, it just knowing exactly what the job entails and what you're going into, where you need to allocate time and resources. Having gone through it a year has helped a ton, and then bring on Coach Akey, Coach Kreiner, Coach Langsdorf, guys that have a tremendous amount of experience coordinating. Also, Coach Akey's been a head coach before, so not only advice and a sounding board, but also on the field, a way to help me when I need to put my attention somewhere.
Absolutely. And I remember when we were catching up in spring, even in fall camp, Trent, and, asking you in the scrum. And I noticed asking you talking about when you were back, with the defense this year. I can just tell that you're excited to be back on that side of the ball and kind of be leading again. Just kind of talk about what led you to kind of name yourself the defensive coordinator and how much fun you're having back with the guys, because even talking to some of your guys this camp, it really seems like they're thrilled to have you back there too.
Yeah, it was kind of a couple of reasons. Number one, I needed to get back coaching. That was the part last year, being removed kind of from the team, and you're the head coach, but you're really the only one not coaching. It didn't make much sense to me. So getting back involved from that standpoint, but also there were things that needed to be fixed on our side of the ball, and I just want to make sure I was in there and my hands were on it. And it was either kind of, you completely trust someone to do it, or you got to do it. And so it was after the first year, okay, I might dive into this thing, make sure we get it right, how it's done, the actions we need, and then, build guys in the room to hopefully one day take it over.
Catching up with Oregon State head coach Trent Bray here on the Rip City Drive. Trent, I know you got a busy schedule. Appreciate your time. Just a couple more questions for you here on a Monday afternoon. Just from everything we've seen, quarterback Malik Murphy has looked as good as advertised. I think, seeing him in the spring and then now seeing him all fall camp, the improvement has been, very noticeable even for us media folks watching it. And was just named a team captain. How important is it to have a dynamic presence under center, and what do you think kind of as a leader he can do for your program this year?
Yeah, I think that dynamic presence and his ability to make all the throws and stretch a defense. I think part of our struggles late in the year offensively were people just loaded the box. And they had to stop Hank in the running game, and they fully committed to that, and we couldn't really threaten them downfield. And I think we can this year with both the receivers we have and Malik, and then his leadership qualities are as good as I've been around at that position. And so he brings a lot, not only from a talent standpoint, but leadership, charisma, all those things you want in a leader and a starting quarterback. Kind
of building off of that, Trent, obviously, I know that, Gundy handles the offense and those kind of things, but just when you've seen, we can see, it just seems like the offense flows really well with Malik. The guys respect him. I've particularly noticed after practices, his conversations with, running backs, tight ends, offensive line, it just seems like he's a dynamic presence, as I said. And, then back to the offense, how much do you think he can kind of elevate the offensive play this year?
Yeah, I think quite a bit. That's what that position, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinion, has to do. They've got to take command of the offense, and they've got to be able to run the show from a lot of different standpoints. And that's one of his best qualities is his ability to command the offense. He's smart. He knows how to help, whether it's redirecting protection or, where to go with the football. The things that a quarterback needs to do that makes a big difference in the success of an offense.
You've got one of the deeper running back rooms that I can remember, Trent, since covering this program, which I've done for a little over 10 years now. And, I see in the depth chart today and just, seeing how, it looks to me 4 or 5 deep. Just talk about how the talent you've got in the backfield and kind of how there's a little bit of versatility as far as maybe one guy that does one thing great, another guy that does something else. It seems like each guy kind of brings something unique to the table.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good players, and then they're a little bit different from each other and their running style and what they can kind of bring to the table. And so I think that really helps when you got runners that run differently. I've always felt from a defensive standpoint, when one guy's a certain way and you're trying to defend him and the guy that comes in next is completely different, it's hard for a defense to adjust and react to that. So I think we got that in our backfield.
Absolutely, and I think back to last year, obviously before Jam was lost for the season, that was a 1-2 punch with him and Hank, and that was obviously two very different backs, and we saw the success, and now there's an even deeper running back room, so definitely excited to see what they can do this year down for your squad. But one of the other things, Trent, that we talked about early in fall camp and followed up with you after the first scrimmage was the growth of the offensive line. I don't think it was any secret after, spring. There were some questions there, some things that needed to still be kind of filled in. But I really thought that, Coach Kavanaugh and what he's been able to do over the course of camp has been impressive. How much have you liked how that group has grown under Cav? And is he still the same Cav you remember back from the old days?
Oh, yeah. Cav hasn't changed since the first day I met him, which is a great thing. But yeah, there's been tremendous amount of growth. And then, getting a lot of healthy body back that we didn't have in the spring or late in the year. Jacob Strand, Tyler Volton, guys like that, which helps the depth. And then also they've been around. They know, what that standard is up front. And then having a guy like Coach Cav leading them and develop them, he does as good or better job than anybody in the country. And so you've really seen the growth from not just spring, but from the beginning of fall camp till where we're at now.
Absolutely. And when you're kind of retooling the offensive line, Trent, just talk about how important it was. Obviously, you lost some pieces to graduation, but Van Wells came back. The center can kind of be construed as the quarterback of the offensive line, so to speak. How important was it to have Van to kind of build that unit around?
Yeah, I think you said it, that position is the quarterback of the offensive line, and getting the guy that's not only extremely talented, but has played a ton of football and played it really well. He's been in, the Pac-12 for going on 4 years now, and he's been a starter for 4 years. So he's got a tremendous amount of experience. He's seen all the looks. He's knows how to adjust, the front and make all the calls. So he's a big help and for all those guys around him.
Catching up with Oregon State Trent Bray, or head coach Trent Bray here on the Rip City Drive. Coach, appreciate your time. Just a couple more questions for you. Let's switch gears and talk your side of the ball, some defense. Just from watching camp, everything from the front seven to the back end, it looks to be improved from last year. I've noticed, it's not only just depth, but I think guys have gotten better in the offseason. What do you think has kind of led to kind of the resurgence on that defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think it's the guys that were here. Worked extremely hard to get bigger, stronger, faster from a physical standpoint. A lot of them were young last year, so they weren't quite the strength and endurance to withstand some of the things that come in a season. They did a great job in the off season. Coach Candido, our strength coach, did a great job developing those guys physically. And then they've worked extremely hard in the off season, not only getting with coaches in their own time, going out with their position group and working on the skills and fundamentals that it takes to be a great player at their position. It's that hard work, and to watch them develop is great. And then, we've added a couple pieces.
Absolutely. And one of the things from your press conference today, Trent, that really caught my eye was you kind of mentioned that, last year's result against Cal doesn't have any bearing on this year. And kind of along those lines, I'm just kind of curious, obviously you would never use it as an excuse or anything else, but just in general, as far as last season, was it one of the more injury-riddled campaigns you can remember as like a coach or being on a staff?
It definitely seemed like it. Yeah, it was tough that way. Yes, but like you said, it wasn't an excuse for what happened. But
sure.
Anytime, I think that's anywhere in the country, and at Oregon State, when we stay healthy, we're pretty good. And so that's been a big focus on the strength and flexibility and all the things in the offseason to be more durable.
Absolutely. And again, the thing that really has caught my eye is the guys you brought in at edge rusher, trying to improve the pass rush unit. And I think about how big it was to get Nico Taylor back, another guy with the JUCO ruling, and again, have your top tackles for loss guy back. And then I've really been impressed with what I've seen from Kai Wallen, Walker Harris. Just talk about the work you guys were able to do, adding some more pieces there, and how big it was to get Nico back, and then maybe some of the defensive linemen, of course, who can kind of cause some of that havoc too.
Yeah, getting Nico back was huge, and he's looking better than he ever has, both physically and his play. And then Kai Walling's done an amazing job. He's really been dynamic for us, which is great to see. And then getting Zakai's on his back, being healthy, which is another guy with some experience. We'll get back. Walker Harris done a great job, and then the return of Takari Hickles back. And he's a guy that before he got hurt last year was the hardest guy for our front to block. And so getting those guys back has really added some depth to that position that we need to produce more at than we did a year ago.
I know Beaver fans are certainly going to be happy to hear, Trent, that some guys that have been on the shelf are getting close to being back, so that's great to hear. Let's talk a little bit about the secondary, too. I think arguably it could be the deepest position group on the team when you talk about, the fact that you guys have some great depth at safety. You've got some great depth at cornerback. How do you like how that group has come together, and how deep do you think you could go if need be?
Well, they've done a great job. They've worked really hard. Again, kind of back to what I said earlier, they've done a great job of taking ownership of that position group, and what happened last year is not acceptable. The way we played defense, and then working very hard to improve that. And they've done a great job. The same thing, young guys that had to play last year are that much more improved. Getting Tyrese Ivey back has been huge. He brings a lot of experience, and he's playing at the top of his game. And I feel really good about that group. How deep do I want to go? I don't know if you ever want to go too deep anywhere.
Sure.
But I feel we got some guys that can go out and play winning football, which is a good feeling.
And obviously, Trent, you being a linebacker, in your playing days, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the inside backers too. Obviously, a couple guys took off at the end of last season, but I think Dexter Foster's potential is off the charts, and obviously I love rooting for a native Oregonian as well. And then I thought what Rajon Davis has been able to bring from USC was great. It was a little disappointing, obviously, to hear the news about Micaiah Tongue, wishing him obviously all the best in his future moving forward. But how do you like the inside depth, and those guys kind of play with some of the same hair on fire that you did?
Yeah, I like the inside group. Dexter might have scared off a couple guys, to be honest with you. Happy with where he's at, and his tremendous growth that he's had from a true freshman year to where he's at now, both physically. I just think a year ago at this time he was 210 pounds. Right now he's 236, and he's moving better and he's stronger than he's ever been. Bringing in Rajon, have liked him for a long time out of high school. Liked what he did at SC, and he fits kind of our skill set that we wanted inside back, kind of like an Easton Mascarenas type guy. So he's done a great job. And then Aiden Sullivan and Jairus Goodman and Cord Shaw, there's some guys there that can play. So it's been good.
Absolutely. A couple more questions here for Trent Bray here on the Rip City Drive. Trent, just a couple more. Appreciate your time as you get ready for the Cal Bears this weekend. Obviously, just kind of looking ahead to Cal, you can always expect a tough defense from Justin Wilcox, the squad. But the reality is it's a very different Bears team than last season with portal movement. How do you kind of go about preparing for that?
Yeah, I mean, this day and age, kind of like us. I mean, we got a lot of new faces. They've got a ton of new faces as well. You got to prepare for them schematically and how they're going to try to attack you. And then you do your research on the personnel side of it. We played against a couple of those guys that they got out of the portal. We recruited a couple of their guys like their quarterback. So we're pretty familiar with who they are, and then getting to know what they're going to do and how they're going to attack you is the big thing.
Absolutely. And last question for you, Trent. Obviously, the schedule this year, final year of kind of the quasi-independent schedule before you guys get into the new rebuilt Pac-12 in 2027. It's, an interesting one with a wide variety of opponents and matchups and, some cross-country travel, all those things. How do you feel about the schedule this year and most notably opening up at Reser Stadium against a Power 4 team?
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. I think this is what we want. We're a Power we're a power team, and we deserve to be in that conversation like we always have. And we have a schedule that reflects that. We've got as tough a schedule than as many as half the Power 4 teams in the country. So we're playing a bunch of good teams, starting with Cal, and that helped us in recruiting guys. That were looking for places to land out of the port. They wanted to play at a high level and then against those type of opponents, and you could do that here at Oregon State. And so I think schedule is exciting for a lot of reasons, but that's a big one, the competition, right where we want to be.
He's Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. You can catch his Oregon State Beavers in action against the Cal Bears Saturday night at Reser Stadium. Trent, I appreciate the time and look forward to catching up post-game after Cal on Saturday night.
I appreciate it.
Oregon State head coach Trent Bray, ladies and gentlemen. Always a great conversation with Coach Bray. Appreciate his time. I know he's wearing a million different hats, not only head coach, defensive coordinator. He's a busy man, especially as you're getting ready to, take a college football team into the start of the season. And more than appreciate his time here on the Rip City Drive. I loved what I heard. It's like it pretty much reinforced what I felt that I learned from this team watching, all fall camp and all of our coverage at beaversedge.com. And I think Oregon State is they've made the right moves to be able to be a better football team this next year. We just ran through it with Trent, obviously the depth across the board. If, maybe, there's, there might be some slight concern, see how the offensive line fits together, maybe how some of the pieces fit in. But for the most part, there hasn't really been anything that as we enter the season, I'm really concerned about. I think Oregon State's quarterback plays strong. I think they got a strong cast of running backs. Receivers, as we talked earlier, some disappointing news came out with Darius Clemens that he posted on his Instagram that he will not be available. So you're kind of Trent Walker and seeing who can step up at that number 2 receiver spot, whether that's, David Wells, whether that's Taz Reddix, whether it's Eddie Freoff, Malachi Durant, another guy that could be in the mix potentially. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to see how that's all going to shake out. And again, I really appreciate Trent Bray's time, and we will be getting you guys ready for Oregon State versus Cal all week. A little bit later in the week on Tuesday, we'll be catching up with an Oregon State offensive player. Wednesday, we'll catch up with a defensive player. A little bit later in the week, we'll catch up with Oregon State radio voice Mike Parker. But again, big shout out and thanks to Trent Bray for joining me on this edition of the Rip City Drive. I'll say this, folks. The one thing that I've always been impressed about with Trent Bray is just how real he keeps it. It's like having a conversation with, a guy at a bar kind of a thing. And I remember noticing that a couple years back when a signing day, usually a head coach will have a press conference and everyone will come in. Signing day a couple years ago, Trent Bray just called each reporter individually and had a conversation. I remember that and being particularly impressed with just, how he carries himself, and got a lot of respect for that man. I really, really do. And looking forward to seeing what his football team can do at Reser Stadium on Saturday night. All right, we'll go ahead and take a quick break. Our final break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we're going to put a big old bow tie on Monday's edition of the show. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Monday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. A little Morgan Wallen bringing us into the final segment here on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone has had a great Monday so far. Big shout out to Trent Bray for joining us last segment. That was an awesome conversation with Coach Bray. You can definitely check that out at ripcityradio.com, as we'll have that up and available for anyone to check out shortly. But man, just a great conversation with Trent Bray, and I chuckle a little bit because our interview ended up being, I think, just about as long or longer than his press conference this morning. So it's always nice when you're able to get a few moments with Trent Bray. I love just being able to have those one-on-one conversations with him. I think he's one of the best. He's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to football. And like I said, very much like you're, at a bar, talking sports over beer. That's kind of the vibe that I get from Coach Bray. And it's just a lot of fun to be able to, talk football with him. And, you can tell there's definitely more of an optimism from him coming into this next season. I know he didn't like to look too far back, but one of the things I wanted to ask him was about the injuries last year. And he even kind of chuckled and was like, yeah, it felt like it. It was tough. And, Trent Bray's not going to use any excuses. And I love that from a coach, because you don't want to. But at the same token, that sometimes I think you also have to, call a spade a spade. And it's like, yeah, the Beavers were dealt a rough deck, or a rough hand, so to speak, of poker last year. And, they made the best of it. I still think, considering, I actually made this comparison to my buddy yesterday. I'm like, let's look at this objectively. I thought Oregon State had a rough year last year, right? I thought you go back at the Cal game, the Air Force game, rough, right? Even San Jose State, UNLV at times, rough, right? After a pretty good start. But they still went 5-7. And then we joked and we're like, or you could have been, DJU and Florida State going 2-10. So, there were also a couple of Oregon State Beavers that also went down to Florida State as well and were a part of their collapse of a season this last year. And I just think it's fascinating that, we live in a world now where team success year to year is so independent. Like it used to be back in the day, hey, this team's got 4 offensive linemen coming back. They got a quarterback. Yep, they're going to be near the top of the conference, versus a team it's like, no, they're going to be rebuilding. They need to have some players take their lumps, get the experience. The portal's changed all of that to where it's if you look at Oregon State this last year, they had a pretty big hole at quarterback, right? There was, a lot that could have been improved if they had consistent, good quarterback play last year. And, then you dive into, this year, and it's the Beavers doubled down and went to go get Malik Murphy. And I think that's going to turn out to be, going back to what Kerry said, I'll double down on it. He said he thinks Malik Murphy is going to be better than DJU. I think he will be. And I don't think that there's even a think about it. As long as he stays healthy, I think DJU had the benefit of a better starting cast of receivers that year. Again, I still think Trent Walker's great. I need to see more from Taz Reddix, David Wells, Eddie Freoff. But when you go back to DJU's receiver core that year, he had Silas Bolden, who obviously went to Texas and, made a solid career for himself. Anthony Gould, who's playing for the Colts. Hopefully Mr. Gould gets a chance to return some kicks this year. And then, obviously, last but not least, you had Josiah Irish, who was a pretty solid receiver in his own right, too, as far as a wide receiver 3. And, I go back and look, and I think when you consider that Oregon State was a heavy run team, right? You could that's always going to be Oregon State's MO, right? Is that they want to run the ball, they want to beat you up and be physical, and then open up the play action passing game. But again, as I go back and look, Oregon State was coming off a 10-3 season in 2022, right? With Chance Nolan and Ben Gulbranson at quarterback. No disrespect to those two guys, but, considering Chance Nolan is now a pitcher in the either minor league baseball, okay, that's where he went. And Ben Gulbranson obviously still playing, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the, kind of issues with Ben showed themselves when they lost to Hawaii the other night. So I think, when you look at that, you're like, okay, you knew they needed to improve. So the Beavers went out and got one of the best quarterbacks in the portal in DJU that year, and he leads Oregon State to an 8-4 record. But here's the thing. He had his low, or compared to Florida State, I guess, played only in 5 games for Florida State. But for Oregon State, up until that point, completed 57% of his throws, which, okay, not great. 2,600 yards was a career high. The 8.4 average was a career high. 21 touchdowns against 7 picks, and then ran for 219 yards and 6 tutties. I guess the thing with DJU, it's like, I think Malik Murphy can be better. And I'm not saying that like DJU wasn't a good squad. And you look at that year, that Pac-12 was stacked. But Oregon State also that year didn't necessarily get over the hump and win any of those games where they like needed to win, right? To be in that, I think of Utah, I think of Washington, they did beat Utah that year, but the Washington, the Oregon, and that's tougher. And they obviously dropped that game to Arizona that year as well. So I think when you look at ceilings, I think it's a very high ceiling for what Oregon State can offer with Malik Murphy. And here's the biggest difference. And this is purely Brendan Slaughter's opinion, nothing else, no more. I think winning matters a lot more to Malik Murphy than it did DJU. Now, I'm not saying that DJU didn't want to win, but from my conversations and getting to know DJU, I don't think it was the most important thing for him. Some of the first words out of Malik Murphy's mouth when we talked to him in spring was, I'm here to win. And even now, like you look at like the way he carries himself, he wants success. He wants team success. He wants Oregon State to win. And I'm not saying that DJ didn't, but I think it's almost more like a Malik. It's kind of like what we saw, I still go back. The desire to win that Michael Penix and Bo Nix had a couple years ago, it was like, I'm going to eat your face off to win kind of a thing. And it's like that, gritty, just absolutely determining thing from your quarterback is something you want to see when it's like the margin for error is so thin in these games. And for Malik Murphy, I think he's kind of that guy. He's got an innate competitive nature about him. He wants to win, and I think that's going to be a rising tide that lifts all boats for Oregon State. So we'll obviously be continuing it more later in the week. Again, you got me all week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll continue on tomorrow. We've got a big show. We'll obviously have an Oregon State offensive player. We got Dan Pizzuta, and we also got Sean Hyken in studio. So